Amidst the vast complex of historical untruths that surround the culturally controlled narrative of the Second World War, Dresden rises out of those scattered ashes, like some forgotten, unworldly shadow, its utter evisceration being, perhaps, the most heinous atrocity ever recorded. On the eve of St. Valentine's Day, 1945, the war in Europe was essentially over. For all practical purposes, Germany was already defeated. Italy and the other Axis countries had fallen. The Red Army was rushing to occupy vast areas of what had once been Germany in the east, while its allies, Great Britain and the United States, relentlessly carpet-bombed the remaining countrysides and cities, particularly the food and transportation infrastructure, into non-existence. Meanwhile, alone and untouched, Dresden quietly slept in the heartland of the Reich, waiting out the close of the war. Most Westerners have heard of Dresden, China, and its airy, delicately executed porcelain, which had become the symbol of that city. For centuries, she had been the center of art and culture, an innovator of refined leisure and recreation. Perhaps the most beautiful city ever built, Dresden was the abode of renowned museums and theaters, a town partly composed of ancient, half-timbered buildings which had stood for 800 years. With venerable tall churches and centuries-old cathedrals gracing her skyline. She was a city of artists and craftsmen, of actors and playwrights, and deeply historical European roots. During the war, however, Dresden was defined by what she was not. She had no significant military or industrial installations, and because of this, she had become, above all other things, a city of children, of women, of refugees, and of the injured and worn, who were recovering from their wounds in her many hospitals. These displaced victims of war, many of whom were among those fleeing the brutal onslaught of communist armies to the east, had come to Dresden because it was commonly believed at the time that the city would not be attacked. Its lack of strategic military or industrial significance, and the well-known presence of tens of thousands of innocent civilians, including Allied prisoners of war, seemed to guarantee some safety, and the people of Dresden, who were attending the cinema or eating their meager dinners at home on that fateful night, went about their evening affairs without the concerns for the war that raged all around them. Dresden's population had doubled in the months before the attack, mainly as a result of the influx of refugees from the Eastern Front. According to British historian David Irving, the briefings given to the British bomber squadrons before the attacks were curiously different. In one, the flight commanders were told that their target was the railway center of Dresden. In another, that it was a poison gas factory. And in a third, that the target was a marshalling grounds for fresh troops within the city. But these were all lies. The marshalling grounds for what few troops remained in the area were located well outside the city, and the old arsenal building had burned down in 1916. Only 2 factories still functioned, one for manufacturing toothpaste, the other for baby powder, none for poison gas. There were in fact no fewer than 18 railway stations in Greater Dresden, and from out of these, only a single bomb would find its mark. According to copious documentation unearthed by various historians from the archives of both the American and British governments, the purpose of the attack was, in fact, to inflict the maximum loss of life on the civilian population, and particularly to kill as many refugees as possible fleeing from the Red Army. In achieving these goals, it was highly successful, planned and executed by those at the very highest levels of the British and American governments, who, to obtain their purpose, instructed the Allied Bomber Command to lie to its own pilots and their crews. At 10 p.m. on February 13th, the first attack wave, consisting of the British No. 5 Bomber Group, began. This Air Force, which consisted of 2,000 bombers with additional support craft, dropped over 3,000 high-explosive and 700,000 incendiary bombs directly on the city center. Incendiary or fire bombs are not known for their efficiency in weight for destroying heavy equipment such as military hardware or railway installations, but they are extremely effective in producing maximum loss of human life. The loads carried by these bombers were 80% incendiary, and the primary goal of the first attack wave, according to British Air Commander Sir Arthur Harris, was to set the city well on fire. And so it did. In fact, all bodies of water within the city limits, including the Elbe River, were set ablaze, as a primary component of the incendiaries was white phosphorus. With a chemical temperature of some 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of the environmental factors, this combustible agent was thrown into every nook of the city. Those who could not bear the torment desperately tossed themselves into the burning waterways, only to die in the thousands, either through drowning or by burning alive on the water's surface. The lack of any effective anti-aircraft defenses allowed the bombers to drop to very low altitudes. Thus, a high degree of precision and visual identification of targets was achieved, despite the fact that they could clearly see that the marked drop areas contained hospitals, sports stadia, and residential zones. The bomber crews obeyed orders nonetheless, raining down a fiery death upon the helpless inhabitants. Tens of thousands were devoured in this early stage by the ensuing fire, for this was a true Holocaust by definition, the complete consumption by fire. The incendiaries began hundreds of fires, and, aided by a stiff wind, these soon coalesced into one infernally massive firestorm. Such heat storms are not natural phenomena, and are seldom created by men. So, to be brief, the intense heat caused by the huge column of smoke and flame, miles high and thousands of acres wide, created a terrific updraft of air in the center of the column. This established an extremely low pressure system at its base, while the surrounding air rushed towards it at estimated speeds of some 1,000 miles per hour. Average-sized tornadoes are the result of temperature disparities of about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. On this particular night, however, the temperature differential was 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This inrushing current of air further accelerated the flames, creating a tornado vortex of white fire, sweeping all life pell-mell and upwards into the night sky, only to be eviscerated in the heart of the inferno. Precisely on schedule, 3 hours after the first attack wave, a second massive armada of British bombers arrived, again loaded almost exclusively with high-volume incendiary bombs. The residents of Dresden, their power systems destroyed in the first raid, had no warning of the second. Again, the bombers focused on the old city center, but this time dividing their targets. One half of the bombs were dropped into the epicenter of the conflagration to keep it stoked. The other half were loosened around the edges of it. The timing of the second armada was designed to ensure that a large quantity of the surviving civilians would have emerged from their shelters in order to escape the city, and to catch firefighters and medical personnel from neighboring towns unawares, both of which was the case, and thus, hundreds of first responders died needlessly as a result. By 2 a.m., Dresden's burning hulk could be seen from over 200 miles away, and the flames would continue to burn for a week. Parts of bodies, bits of charred clothing, metal scrap, and ash fallout from the firestorm continued to scatter about for days in the surrounding countryside. In some residential basements, rescue workers found nothing but the liquefied remains of inhabitants, whereafter men had to shovel yards of this rendered human fat, congealed into vast pools, like petroleum jelly, and often a foot deep, before any reconstruction could properly begin. But this evil deed was not yet over, for the following afternoon, on Ash Wednesday, while medical and other emergency personnel from all over central Germany were converging on Dresden, 450 flying fortresses, with P-51 fighter support, arrived to finish the job. As David Irving wrote, just a few hours before, Dresden had been a fairy tale city of spires and cobbled streets, but now total war had put an end to all that. The ferocity of the US raid on the 14th of February had finally brought the German people to their knees. Yet it was not the firebombs that utterly demoralized them. It was the Mustang fighters, which, having suddenly appeared low over the city, began firing on everything that moved. One section of P-51s concentrated on the riverbanks, where masses of bombed-out people had gathered. In fact, it was British prisoners of war who had been released from their burning POW camps, who were among the first to suffer the discomfort of these machine gun attacks. Wherever columns of walking people were moving in or out of the city, they were pounced on by the fighters, only to be raked to death in their thousands. Despite large-scale efforts by Western authorities to downplay the loss of human life, using completely unbelievable figures in their blackout of this story, enough primary evidence and first-hand accounts had made it into the historical record before these were scrubbed. There can be no doubt that over 150,000 innocent victims died, with some estimates being as high as 300,000. And, along with the body count, in relative terms, more destruction befell that city in a single day than was inflicted on the whole of Great Britain during the entire war. So, in summation, when all seems lost, and your morale has ebbed to its lowest point, and your will to fight on in this culture war has slackened, remember Dresden, with her glorious spires ablaze against the nighttime sky. Then, let this vision fan the flames of your righteous purpose.